Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Salemi, DynaSCAPE Software. I have Jordan Weir, Implementation and Training Specialist, here with us today. We're in the second installment of the Manage360 Masterclass, and the Masterclass training sessions is all about getting the most out of your landscape business operating system. Today, we're talking about optimizing Manage360 for success. The whole idea here is to go through all of the configuration and the settings so that you can really hit the ground running when the season starts and things are just set up for you the way that you need to be. So in this session, in particular, optimizing Manage360 for success, we're going to learn how to optimize your Manage360 experience. And the settings are really the backbone of how each of the processes in Manage360 work and give you some understanding how to use them, what they mean, and how they'll improve your tracking and all of your reporting options. You know, when we really think about what it means to optimize, it's making the best or most effective use of either a situation or an opportunity or a resource. And in this case, Manage360 is your resource. It's your operating system for your business. So we want to help you make the best or the most effective use of Manage360. Jordan, do I have you with me right here?
Hey, Joe. Yes, you do.
Hey, right on. Thanks for joining us. Everyone, Jordan has been an implementation and training specialist with us for some time, part of the team, and you know, he just knows the system inside and out. And I can't think of anyone better that might be able to take us through and show us what settings mean and what they're able to do for us in getting the best, most effective use of Manage360. So Jordan, I think it's time that we should dive in and take a look at all the configuration settings and options that we have available to us.
Awesome. All right, so let's go. Hey, everybody. So, yeah, you should be able to see my screen now.
We sure can.
So this is the home screen, and this is where you're going to be when you log in. And today we're going to spend some time on the settings. So everybody should know how to get there. And I'm going to be going through these one by one, but I'm going to start down here under My Company Settings. And once again, the whole point of today's session is how to optimize these settings, what the best configuration is. And there's a lot of options. You know, it's really variable depending on what your end goals are. So, you know, you can approach this however you want, but we're just going to go away today with some suggestions. So starting down here under My Company Settings, we've got the company information. And so this is what you want to be filling out in order to have your company info appear on your proposals and your invoices. So when you're thinking about this, you're just thinking, what do you want the customer to see? So, you know, the appropriate address, the billing information, all that stuff. This is where you set that up. Next, we have divisions. So we're gonna be going through these semi-quickly. Some of them we'll spend a bit more time on. I'm not going to talk about budgeting today, but I'll just mention that in the divisions, this is where you can set up a separate construction versus a maintenance division, or if you have a lawn care division or a holiday lighting or snow removal division, this is where you can make that distinction here and completely separate the budget and overhead recovery settings for each, you know, facet of your business. Within the division, there's a few things that are pretty important. The main component would be the budget. So this is where you want to essentially be putting your projected budget for the entire year, along with your goals in terms of cost of goods sold and overhead expenses. So again, I'm not going to dive too much into this other than to say, this is where you can set up your overhead recovery numbers. And if you're going to be doing that, you can just remove or change these numbers here, and it will adjust your labor burden markup, or sorry, your labor overhead markup. And I think last week we touched on this a lot as well with when Fabio was running those sessions. So not too much to say there, except up top here, there's a few more settings like the default labor burden, and the default warranty. So defaults in Manage are going to come into play when we need a setting to exist in certain scenarios. Like when I create a new item in the cost book, we need a supplier to be there. We need a labor burden to be there. So this is why we set up a default. If I were to go into the cost book and create a new crew type, it would default to this labor burden if my crew type falls within the construction division. Default warranty applies to plants and to materials. So we'll talk about how you can set those up in other ways, but this is where you set up some defaults. And that's going to be a common theme of the settings, is that there's a lot of stuff that's a default here. We got the some more defaults with purchasing tax and sales tax. So once again, this is when you create new items in the cost book. They need to have a purchasing tax, and that could be tax exempt if you don't use purchasing tax, or set up a purchasing tax here. Likewise, sales tax. That will be either taxable or non-taxable, depending on what you need. With estimates and jobs, we have a numbering system. So the next estimate I create is going to need to have a number. The number would be the unique identifier for the estimate. So in addition to having just a name, we want to have a number that says this number is uniquely a part of this estimate, as opposed to the name. You might have many similar or duplicate names. So in this case, we set a prefix. So that could be E underscore in this case, or we could say E19 is a very typical setup here. And likewise, we could do J19. So my next estimate in this case would be E19 15549. And if I won that estimate, it would be J19 15549. This is another default here. Days for estimate to expire. That is when you're creating new estimates, the days until expiration. We have a new setting coming out next week in our next update that's going to allow you to choose to enable or disable the estimate due date on the bottom of the proposal. So that'll be exciting. Keep an eye out on the release notes for that. Some more default settings here. This is related to job tracking. So if you're familiar with job management in Manage360, this should look pretty familiar, even if you're not used to seeing it on this screen. This is on the job, on the details tab of the construction job. Your options are to track your time either by labor type or by cost code. So with labor types, that's corresponding to your settings. So I'll quickly just jump over to the cost book here. Your labor types are right here. So you can keep track of your time by the activity, appliance install, asphalt installation, bed prep, etc. But if you find yourself with a timesheet that has quite a lot of labor types on it, you can instead switch to cost codes in order to simplify things. And so what I mean by simplify is, instead of seeing, again, asphalt, bed prep, bioretention, cabinet assembly, these could all be rolled up under a single cost code or just a couple cost codes. Like we can see here, asphalt installation, bed prep, these all fall under the landscape cost code. So if I have a timesheet that has 6 hours of this, 6 hours of bed prep, 6 hours of bioretention, I can instead display that on the timesheet as 18 total hours of the landscape cost code. So it's used to simplify things, and we're going to come across cost codes again in the settings. So that's a little introduction to it, and we'll see that shortly. But back to the settings in the division. This is where we set up our default. So what we want our job tracking settings to be whenever we start a new job by default. So labor type or cost code as the default. These use work areas to track functions down here. This is, again, some defaults for job tracking. This is saying on my timesheet, do I want my time broken up by work area? So that could be front garden, mulch installation versus hardscaping or paver install in a paver patio work area. Do I want that broken up by work area, or do I want it just bundled together? And so you can address that on an item by item basis. So we can have time broken up by work areas, but materials lumped together, or everything in work areas in this case, if I check all the boxes. The division crew settings. So this comes into play on the general conditions and a few other places as well. So the default crew size is assuming that you're going to have a default crew size of 1. And when you're calculating your general conditions, it's going to use that to figure out how many hours there are in a working day. So in this case, if I have a crew size of 1 and that one person is working a 10-hour day, then the production hours of the day are 10 hours. One day is equal to 10 hours. So if I had a crew size of 3, that would mean that one day is 30 production hours. 3 people can accomplish 30 production hours in a day. So it uses that for the general conditions calculation to figure out how many days the job is meant to take. So that's, again, a default. You can configure that on an estimate by estimate basis. You might have a job that's need a large crew as opposed to a small crew. So that's why we have that here. Default start and end time is next, and that will affect your timesheets. So when you create a new timesheet and you've got stuff scheduled on that day, especially if it's a construction job, it's going to assume your day is starting at 7 a.m. and ending at 5 p.m. And that also has some impacts in scheduling for maintenance. It's going to assume, again, that your day runs from 7 till 5 and not attempt to schedule stuff going beyond that. The default lunch time. You can just zero this out if you don't want to have a lunch on your timesheet, but what's going to happen is if we have 12 o'clock p.m. in here, it's going to automatically add to every new timesheet you create the lunch non-billable item. And of course, that can be paid or unpaid because we're going to see non-billable items in a moment. But here we're saying that include lunch, make it start at 12, make it last 30 minutes by default. And that's kind of arbitrary when it starts and how long it lasts. That's supposed to be how long it's supposed to last and when it's supposed to start. But of course, your guys in the field are going to enter their actual time that they spent taking lunch break. Finally, the working days here, Monday through Friday. So if you work on Saturdays and Sundays, you can check that off. But typically, people are going to have a 5-day working week. And that, again, affects the schedule. For instance, if you have a Monday to Friday and you have a construction job scheduled for an entire month, when you look on the calendar, you're going to see that the job is booked Monday to Friday, but not on weekends. So that's pretty much the impact of that there. With a lot of these settings, as you're going through, you can highlight certain items, and when you put your mouse over an item, a tooltip might appear. So in this case, it just gives us a little blurb that explains, what is the default labor burden? Where does it come from, right? So when you're going through this yourself, there's a lot to see, and some of it will kind of explain itself. And then, of course, there's the help manual, which can be found here. And that also goes into a lot of detail about certain things. So you can open that up, type in keyword and search, and try and find what you're looking for. So that is the division settings. And we're going to keep going down through my company settings here. So we're going to skip a couple. Countries, states, and provinces. There's not a whole lot to say there. Just we've got Canada and the United States in our country list by default. You can add more countries, you can add more states and provinces if you would like, but the ones you need should be in there. So these aren't going to really do anything in terms of configuration. However, regions will come into play. So you've probably noticed that when you're creating customer accounts, that there's a region drop-down list on the customer's account. So what a region is it's essentially a custom category for your accounts for filtering and for reporting. So when you want to run the sales performance summary report, you can run it by region to compare won versus lost sales or opportunities by region. And so that can be geographic. You describe what you want your regions to be. You can see here we could break the city into east versus west, right? Or maybe a county, perhaps. You could call it zone 1, zone 2. So it could be your own custom breakdown. And it doesn't necessarily have to be geographic. You can use region however you want, in that it's going to just be a category that you have full control over. When you create a customer's account, you've already got their address and the city and state or province that they live in. So you've got all that information. It's just this is another level in order to categorize the account. So then we got taxes. Well, this one's pretty self-explanatory. I'll open it up here. We have our tax list. And so all you're doing here is entering the different tax codes that apply to you. So, your mileage may vary depending on where you live. You might have a lot of tax codes. You might have very few. So when we're creating a tax code, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 characters that we can enter here. And so this is just to identify what the tax code is supposed to be for. And then we get a percentage. So if we have a 7% tax rate, we plug it in there. And if we're required to display a tax number on our invoices, then we can put one in here. And there's a separate option, display a tax number on invoices, that will come across soon. So yeah, just if you were required to display a tax number, you probably already know that you are required to, in which case you'd enter that information right here. This option though, show amount on periodic payment invoices. This must be checked off in order to display the tax information on a periodic payment invoice for maintenance. So the reason for that is, it's kind of hard to say when you've got a periodic payment plan what taxes were specifically incurred within that month, because month by month you may be doing different services. So the default is that invoice does not include sales tax, but if you check this box off, it will include sales tax. So those are taxes. Moving on, we have employee status and employees. Now, the defaults for employee status are just active and inactive. And so this can be a little bit misleading when you're thinking about it, because when you're on an employee, there's an active checkbox. So this active or inactive doesn't have anything to do with the functionality of how an employee behaves. And it would make more sense to put stuff here like on vacation, on sick leave, no longer with the company. So not everybody will use these employee statuses, but if you set them up, essentially the place that they are used is right here on the employee list to see this person is active, this person is inactive, so whatever that means, right? You can decide what you want that to mean, or if you even want to use this language. And then terminated would be this person was probably fired, right? So that is what you use the employee status for. And you can create a view. You can say, show me employees by their status, or you can filter by clicking on that to organize them by status. So that's what the employee status does. And we'll come back to the employees in just a moment. We have crews right here. And so this is for scheduling and creating timesheets. So if I open this right here, construction crew 1, we'll see that, so it has 3 people, 3 employees listed on the crew. So if I were to make a timesheet right now for construction crew number 1, it would have these 3 people on it. And as we can see, Fabio would be the foreman of that crew. So the crew also needs a supervisor in addition to a foreman. It needs to know which divisions it's allowed to be used in. So I could use it in multiple divisions, but it needs to have a default division as well. So, why would you have different crews? Well, because your employees are members of different crews, and when you make a timesheet, you want at least one person to be on there. At the very least, you want the foreman to be on there, so that way you know who's in charge of the timesheet, who's meant to be filling it out, especially if you're using the mobile app, because the foreman is the person that can control the timesheet from their phone. So the crew can have a color. And so if you color code your equipment, you'll probably end up using whatever color you already have for that crew. But the color that we assign here is primarily used on the calendar. So that way, if all the crews are color-coded, we can see, differentiate. The blue crew is construction crew 1, and then the red crew is construction crew 2. And then that way we can differentiate if we have both crews selected at the same time, just by the color, which crews are assigned to which jobs. And that just makes, the calendar very easy to use. So when you're setting this up, the advice that I would give would be, make sure that you have the correct foreman and supervisor assigned. If you want to use the crew across multiple divisions, add those divisions here. And in order to add employees to a crew, we actually don't do it here. We do it from this settings employees section. And if you have people that are going to be part of that crew most of the time, then you can feel free to add them to the crew. If your crews are a little bit more fluid though, and you have people going, across multiple crews on a day-by-day basis, then you're probably just going to want to have the foreman as the only permanent member of that crew. That way you can just add and remove people as needed. And on a day-by-day basis, you can always reassign the foreman. So if your regular construction 1 foreman is sick, you can have a substitute in on the timesheet. So it's really the default foreman for the crew. So there's a lot of flexibility there. You're just trying to get a setup that's going to save you time because you engage the timesheet, you've got the people you need on it, and if you've done your scheduling, then the jobs that you need for that day are going to be on there as well. So let's move on to the employees section here. So I'll just Amaya Appleton. There we go. So when you're setting up employees, at the minimum, you need to have a first and last name, and that's it. We could save an employee at this point, but we probably want more than that because the purpose of having an employee in Manage is either they are a user of Manage360 or they are going to be a crew member and be on timesheets. So if they're a crew member and they get paid an hourly wage, this becomes very important. The cost per hour gets used to calculate the actual cost of labor when you're filling out time on a timesheet. It's going to take this cost per hour, multiply it by the number of hours that employee has worked, and then it's going to factor in a labor burden markup to that rate. So the labor burden markup, that comes from the labor burden that was on the original estimate. So let me just jump over here to crew types quickly with my hardscape crew. So if I have labor on an estimate and the hardscape crew is assigned for pricing for that labor, then I can pull up, or the labor burden that's going to be used is going to be coming from the crew type that is used on the estimate. So you could have multiple different crew types on an estimate and therefore multiple different labor burdens that will differ depending on the activity. But so that's the calculation right there. It's gonna factor in the labor burden on top of that employee cost per hour. Default division doesn't really have any impact, so you can kind of just ignore this. The employee status we talked about already, so we see how that comes into play on the just the main employee screen. So if I wanted to say, Amaya is now active, then that's all I need to do. And once again, that's a little bit misleading because we have right here, this is active checkbox. This one actually has some functionality. If you uncheck that box, that employee will truly be marked as active or inactive rather. So this is just a tag. This is an actual function of Manage360 here. This doesn't have to be active or inactive. Birthday is optional. This is where we assign the crew that this employee is a part of, and it can be multiple crews. If Amaya is doing construction and maintenance, then we can say that she is a member of both crews. This is where we assign the supervisor for the employee, so we can say that Chance Biddle is now the supervisor for Amaya. And really that's all it says, is that this person is the supervisor. So it's a reference field, essentially. We have the contact info here, so not required. Again, also for your own reference. But if you fill out the email of the employee right here, then what this will do, if you create tasks for that employee can receive a notification that a new task has been created for them in Manage360. And of course, to create a task for somebody, that person must first be a user. So we'll talk about how to make users. So right now, Amaya is not a user. So while we have an account, an employee record for Amaya, Amaya can't log in and do anything. Amaya can be used on a timesheet as a worker, and we can put hours against Amaya, and especially because we have cost per hour there, if we don't fill that in, it's going to assume that Amaya is working for free. So if you have somebody on timesheet, this is a pretty crucial field to fill out. But if we want Amaya to be able to log in, we come to the Roles and User Settings tab and select the User checkbox. Once we do that, we hit Create. And so Amaya, right, we just type in a username, we type in a password right here. We can hit this box if we want Amaya to change her password the first time she logs in. And then we hit Apply. So now that there's a username and password, we must also dictate what level of access Amaya is going to get. So if we want Amaya to just be a crew member, we could say that, and as a crew member, you can't really do very much. But if Amaya was a foreman, we could say Amaya has the construction foreman role. Amaya has the maintenance foreman role. These foreman roles are pretty powerful in that they allow the foreman or the employee to log in. And once they've logged into the website, they can actually see a fair amount of stuff. We can tell exactly what they can see by clicking on that role permissions box right here. So what can a construction foreman do? If we select that role from this list, we can see they can do everything with tasks. So these are the 4 kind of database actions that you can take. You can have permission to view something. You can have permission to edit something. You can create a new instance or a new object or delete an existing one. So the construction foreman can do all 4 of those things with tasks. However, with accounts, they can simply view them. They can't make new accounts or edit existing ones. They can just reference that in order to find the location of a customer. They can view and edit the job log, but they can't create or delete job logs. And that has more to do with actually building an estimate and then a job than explicitly creating or deleting a job log. They have full access to the mobile app and full access to timesheets and limited access to work orders. So they can edit and view them, but can't create or delete them. So as you can see, this security role gives you access to quite a bit of stuff. And maybe you have the mobile app and you just want the foreman to be able to use the mobile app and not log on to the website, not use Manage360 for anything in that regard, just use the mobile app. That is why we have the foreman mobile privilege right here. The only thing you can do with this role is log into the app. So this is a pretty popular one if you have the mobile app. But as you're going through these roles, you just kind of want to decide, what does this person need to see? What do they need to do? What is their role within Manage360? And you can have multiple roles. And if you do, the privileges will sort of stack together. So you'll have the cumulative access of all of the security roles assigned to you. But if you have administrator, you can do everything. Administrator has full access. These don't have view, edit, create because job as change orders, that technically doesn't apply to this setting. And also you don't do timesheets because only the foreman does timesheets. So as an administrator, you can't log into the mobile app or do anything with it, but you need to have a timesheet and be the foreman of a timesheet to do anything anyway. So if you were an administrator and a foreman, you might have both of these roles. That could be something that happens. So For the most part, these security roles will give you permission, but some of them also allow you to appear in certain areas. So by that I mean assignments like salesperson, designer, estimator, supervisor, foreman. So let's go ahead and take a look at an account right now and kind of see one place where that plays out. So every account that you create is going to need to have a salesperson. So the first time you create an account, it must have a salesperson. If it says please select an item and you don't have a foreman yet, you can't save the account. So we need to have somebody here to be, sorry, not a foreman, a salesperson. When I move on to an opportunity, I can have a salesperson and a designer and an estimator. So in order to appear on this list, I need to have the corresponding security role. I can't just be an administrator. I would need to be an administrator and a salesperson. So just keep that in mind as you're setting that up. Finally, we have the notes section here. And so this is just where you can fill out general notes about the employee. As you're doing that, keep in mind that employees are also contacts. So contact info and notes will appear not just on this screen, but also on the contacts menu, right? So this would be an employee right here, or sorry, this would be an employee because it's not linked to an account. So we want to keep that in mind whenever you're filling anything out. So let's back out of employees now that we've covered that. So just a quick recap, because that was a pretty extensive section. Employees can be created for use on your timesheets, or they can be created because they're going to be users. If somebody's not ever going to be a member of a crew and work out in the field, and they're not ever going to use Manage360, you don't really need to have them listed as an employee. And if you did, it would just be to have their contact information in here. So let's move on to configuration next. Here we have several settings. So the account type default, commercial or residential. So this is actually 3 defaults in a row here. This happens when you create a brand new account. It'll either be commercial or residential. So pick the one that you do the most work in that type. And for sales tax, for residential or commercial, maybe commercial has sales tax and exempt does not, or residential does not. So that would be your thinking behind here. With the estimate settings here, we have some options such as allow estimate locking. So if you've ever built an estimate in Manage360, you've come across this. You open an estimate and it says the estimate is locked by this user, and it might even say it's locked by you. So that will happen if somebody has an estimate open and you try and open it. It'll also happen if somebody, they might not necessarily actually have it physically open, but they didn't close it properly. So in order to close an estimate properly, you need to either hit save and close, or you need to hit cancel. If you just exit out of the tab or just close your web browser down, Manage doesn't get a signal to know that that person is done with that estimate, and it will just keep it locked. So you can, of course, hit the unlock button, or you can hit read only if you don't want to take control of that estimate back. The estimate locking is a good feature because it'll just give you a warning that somebody else might be using that estimate. If, however, you don't want that and you don't think that is ever going to be a problem for you, you can turn it off right here. Default create material kit and default create plant kit. So this comes into play when you are going to be building an estimate. So it happens at the time you add a material or a plant to the estimate. So once again, this is a default. It's just determining whether or not that box is checked off automatically. So you might be wondering why you might use those settings, why you might have them set to yes or no. I think that's a discussion to have for another day, because I could go on and on about that. But it's essentially an estimate organization thing. You may want to have your items listed under Costbook items, or you might want to have everything grouped into smaller subsections within a work area. So we're likely going to talk about that in another session. Here's a preference for how your plant names are displayed on estimates, change orders, and proposals. This one has to do with the plant name format. Do you want to show the plant size after the plant name? So right here, I would have common name and then 7 gallon, right? That would essentially be my plant name format with these two options. This has to do with kits and lead items on kits. So the typical example would be a mulching kit. I'm just going to go quickly search for one right here. Mulch. A bed prep with mulch. So this kit, it has many different types of mulch, and then it has fertilizer, herbicide, and some labor. So my lead items are just different types of mulch. You can tell that they're lead items because this is checked off right here. So when I build an estimate, it's going to say you only need one type of mulch, so pick the mulch you want, and then I'll bring in all the rest of the stuff. So this would be, do I want my kit name to say bed cleanup with mulch, or do I want it to say bed cleanup with mulch, black dyed mulch, or whatever lead item I end up choosing? That's what that option does. You want to see the lead item name next to the kit name. People will typically say for this yes and yes. So those are two very common yeses. Here we have some billing options. Print invoice on create invoice from job. This has to do with creating an invoice while you have a job open. So if you're familiar with billing, you know that there's several different ways to create an invoice. You can create an invoice from a work order. You can create an invoice from a job. You can create an invoice from a timesheet, or you can create an invoice from the billing menu. But if you're making it from a job, this option applies, and when you make the invoice, it'll download it automatically as a PDF to your downloads folder. So if you want your invoices to download automatically, specifically while you're making them within a job, then this item should be yes. It doesn't really matter which one you pick. If it's set to no, you must always manually download your invoices by opening the invoice and selecting Actions, Print Invoice. And then some other ones here. These are very basic. Do you want to see your company address on your invoice? Do you want to see the estimator on the invoice? This is usually a no. Company logo is usually a yes. Phone number and salesperson, these ones are divisive. Typically no, but more so than estimator. Salesperson more so than estimator. And then tax number, if you are required to display one, then you would choose yes. With work orders, there are some options here. The default arrival window and default duration really only come into play if you're making your work orders ahead of time. So if they're impromptu, spur of the moment type things, like you're doing a job for a customer, you're on their site and they say, hey, can you do this extra thing for me? And you want to bill them separately, time and material, you would make the work order either at that moment or later on in the day, maybe after you get back to the office. So this default arrival window, default duration, it corresponds to, on a work order, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this just because this session is running a little bit long. It has to do with these sections right here, which affect scheduling and how the work order is printed. So that will display if you print it off for the customer. Default include planting labor. When you're adding a plant to a work order, yes or no. So the default is no, that the plant just comes on with no labor because the labor is going to be time and material, not necessarily estimated. But if you'd like that production rate that's associated with the plant size to come along, you can say yes, include planting labor. And then finally, the option for configuration here, security, minimum password strength. This is just if you don't care about having, which we don't recommend, but you could have very weak passwords. to probably just a single character. Don't recommend that once again. I would say at least medium is what you want to go for. It just determines how complex your passwords must be. And if it doesn't meet the requirements, it'll tell you to increase the security of your password. So now that we've covered all that, and back out here, and so we're almost done with my company settings, regional settings and formatting. I'm not going to explain each of these one by one. I'll just say that you can choose stuff like date and time formats from here. So you can switch between 24-hour time, regular time, or 12-hour time, regular. The date format, and you can choose a locale with some default settings here. So I'll back out of that as well. And then workflow task sets. This will be something we touch on in more detail in another session as well. Just know that this is where you set them up. So when you have repeatable processes, like in this case, for a new construction job that I win, I want to immediately purchase materials, apply for permit, call for a utility location, advertising action. I want to do all 4 of those things, and I'm going to do them every time. Instead of making those tasks manually, I can instead have a workflow task set that will save me time and just create them all in one fell swoop. So those are the My Company settings right there. So those are mostly configuration options and a lot of default stuff that we found there. A lot of the rest of the stuff is categories within Manage360. So we're going to see these, and they're going to be very similar, so they won't take very long to cover. The first one on the list is actually a fairly new option that we added, I think 2 releases ago, the account ratings. So the account ratings, by default, you have not applicable. But here are some examples. So you could do 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, in good standing, do not serve. Those are just some pretty standard options for the account rating. And that comes into play. I'll just pull up a customer account quickly. Comes into play right here on the account. So this is just, in order to get something to appear here, you want to go into the settings and make your account ratings. Opportunity types, yet another category. So we'll see some good examples here. So the defaults that we include on a brand new site are commercial and residential, but you can break them down into whatever categories you want, and they're going to typically reflect the type of business you do. And the whole point of that is to get a good report. If you're running, for instance, the sales performance summary report, you can compare your sales of renovations versus new construction, right? You can compare your pool installs with new construction. If you're doing maintenance, compare full service contracts with lawn care contracts. That's all set up. Just pull that up quickly. On the opportunity. Right here. So lead sources, this is also an opportunity and an account setting. So this is going to happen in both places, but so this is just to record where is this lead coming from. And so that could be, you know, they're a repeat customer, or you have another company that refers to you often. You're trying to get data on a specific advertising campaign that you're engaging in. This is how you enter that as a category that can be tracked. And it's under lead source on the opportunity, and then also lead source on the account, right here on the account. So that can come in handy in both places. Your sales phases have to do with opportunities in that this is how you manage your sales pipeline. So you can create custom sales phases. We include some default ones that are pretty standard and pretty helpful. A lot of people stick with them. But you can customize that if you have any special circumstances like declined. That would be reflecting an opportunity that was lost or not qualified. But then you can also assign it to this declined status. Long-term pending. This is to say, that you have not said no. So you're going to wait 30 days. You're saying there's a 50-50 shot, but this an opportunity in this sales phase is meant to be followed up with in 30 days. So this is not an opportunity session. I'm not going to really talk about that very much, but I'll just say that when you're creating sales phases, the name is important, the default length is important, and the probability is important if you pay attention to that. And these are, again, just defaults. So if I want to put somebody on long-term pending, I could say that they're going to be pending for a whole year, right? If they're going to get back to me next year because extenuating circumstances just wasn't working for them at the time, but they want to follow up later, you can do something like that. Opportunity outcome reasons. This is, again, for your reporting. When you want to compare won, lost, and not qualified outcomes, you can track those outcomes against individual outcome reasons. So you'd fill this in with anything that is just goes beyond what we have listed here. I won this estimate because our price was really good, or I lost this estimate because someone else had a lower price, right? That's the kind of stuff that you can record in outcome reason. And that's typically entered when an opportunity is closed manually or an estimate is won or lost. Right here in estimate settings, we've got a few here. The payment schedules come into play on estimates, and this is a time saver function here. This is if you offer a 10-40-40-10 payment schedule, then you could just set that up here. And if you're doing milestone payments on an estimate, that's how you can just quickly select this as an option. The payment schedule will show up on the proposal if you want it to. So that's actually another option we're going to include in our next update, that you can show or hide the payment schedule from the proposal. But yeah, this is just where you set up the default language of each payment item along with the percentage associated with them. And this comes into play once again on the estimate, on the billing section of the estimate. Proposal headers and footers. So this has to do with your proposals. And so this place right here is the best place to set up your proposal headers and footers. So the proposal header is usually going to be a kind of boilerplate preamble to the contract. And they can be something generic like an introduction to your company. You can also include some warranty information up here if you want to. Anything you want to have on that proposal, you just decide, is it best to have at the top or at the bottom in the footer? So you might have different headers based upon different types of work. You might have a header for a pool install or a maintenance header. And the same deal with your proposal footers. This will typically be your terms and conditions. And there can be warranty information. You can have, once again, many different footers that can be engaged based upon the type of contract that you're dealing with. If you have plants, you probably want to have your plant warranty on there. If you don't have plants, then don't show that on the proposal. So once again, this is the best place to create and edit these templates for proposal headers and footers. Right here, construction and maintenance estimate templates. If you only have one of those two modules, then you're just going to see estimate templates. But what we do here is we can just delete these, right? So this one actually says to delete it, so I'm going to do that right now. If you have an estimate template that you want to retire, this is where you would come in order to remove it. Your estimate templates will be discussed in another session having to do with optimizing your estimating. And some best practices around that, but this is just where you can remove those templates. These four sections right here are categories for your kits, materials, plants, and services. So the reason that you'd want to have different categories for materials and plants would be for plants specifically, separate trees from shrubs, from annuals, from perennials, that kind of thing. That just makes it easier to filter and search for what you're looking for when you're building an estimate. Or you can run a report to say, show me my list of trees from this specific supplier or from all suppliers. And then you could get a Word document or an Excel document extract of that if you're going to run one of our Costbook reports that you can find over here. And then kits, once again, is just a category for your kits and services, separating, hardscape from paver kits, from lighting or irrigation kits, and then service categories, lawn care versus something like irrigation. Chemical applications. There we go. I blanked on that for a moment. We have this import function right here. This is actually pretty important, not only when you're going to set up a new site, but it's really useful when you're going to update your plants and materials on an annual basis, or more frequently than that. But if you have a plant list or a material list and you want to have new costs for the new year, so this is something Fabio showed you in the last session, but you could upload them using this section right here. So yeah, you can reference the recording of last week's session for that. Other than that, unit types, just try to have some good unit types here, like meters, months, ounces, right? Ultimately, when you're creating stuff like this, these are the unit types that you're going to use for a plant or a material. So, I sell polymeric sand by the bag or by the ton, right? You just want to have the appropriate unit type for that option. So the thing to avoid here would be duplicates. You don't want to have a messy list of unit types. Finally, your cost codes, which we've touched on in the beginning of this session here. This is where you create them. So if you want to generalize your labor types down into cost codes, you'd go ahead and you just come up with a category. So I could say everything that could be related to landscape work is tracked under that cost code. And that's, again, to simplify your job tracking. So these are some pretty good examples here. You would probably end up having less cost codes than this in most circumstances, but you could break it down into as much or as little detail as you want, keeping in mind that the purpose of cost codes is to simplify from what you have set up as your labor types. So that takes us to our final few sections here. We've got job types. Analogous pretty much to your opportunity types. This is for tracking different types of work that you're doing for the purpose of reporting. And also for filtering, if you want to go to the jobs menu and have a filter that says, show me my active maintenance jobs, then you can do that. And this is, again, a pretty typical, some good examples of different options here that people would be using. Job phases, you could think of these as your opportunity phases because they're quite similar, but in progress, complete, on hold. This is a setting that comes into play when you have an ongoing job, and it's fundamentally a tag for that job to say, this one is now complete. You just mark the status as complete. And those are the three standard ones. That's really all you need there, unless you want to get creative and have several different statuses for very specific scenarios. Work order substatuses, we can touch on that another date because we haven't covered any maintenance stuff or work order stuff really for these sessions yet. This one is for optimizing timesheets, so I'll dive into that quickly. Your non-billable work types is for tracking time against an item that is not a job. So travel time, load and unload, weather delay. This is usable on a timesheet in lieu of a job. So you can add stuff here, mark whether it's paid or unpaid, but this is the typical setup as well. You might even use fewer than these. And yeah, finally, accounting settings and payment terms. Payment terms are going to link up with QuickBooks if you use the accounting connector. They're also optionally allowed to display on the proposal. And optionally, when we release, again, our next update, that's going to be one of the things that you can enable or disable from the proposal. But yeah, this language should already be in QuickBooks, and if you're going to be using the accounting connector, the two of these link together. So that takes us to our final item of the day, the accounting settings. So this has to do with how you're going to be billing. If you're going to be doing periodic billing for maintenance and you have a lot of monthly recurring payments, you might want to have show future billable items set to something other than no. If you want to be able to make your invoices for those first of the month payments a day in advance or a week in advance, select the appropriate item from this setting, and then you'll see those invoices come in early, and they'll be available to set up in advance of that first of the month payment date or whenever it is. This is just so your billing department can get a jump on those recurring periodic invoices. Next invoice number. Well, this will be the number of the next invoice I create, and it'll go up by 1 every time. So you can customize this if you want. Start from 1,000 if you're brand new with Manage360. And then these are some QuickBooks options here. I think we're going to do a separate QuickBooks session, so I won't touch on these today. Yeah, we'll have another accounting connector session at some point. So that's it for this session. We've covered quite a bit of content here. There's really a lot of stuff in the settings, so yeah, I think I'll let Joe take it back and wrap things up here.
Thanks, Jordan. Wow. I knew there's a lot of settings, and when you go through them, a little bit here and a little bit there, they don't seem like there's all that much, but when you go through them one by one, holy man, there's a lot to configure in Manage360. So thank you very much for showing us how to really get the most out of the utilization and the effectiveness through settings. I really appreciate that. We have a number of attendees with us this afternoon, but we did have a question that stemmed back from when you were going through the employees settings. And Ben asked a question. He said, would you use the productive wage in the employee cost? So when you're putting in the employee wage, would you put the productive wage right in that particular employee's wage amount?
Yeah, so I wouldn't. I would put just their actual wage rate in there, and then the labor burden would be marked up after that when I do the job tracking.
Great, thank you. If anyone else has any questions, please send us an email or give us a call. You can reach our support team at support@DynaSCAPE.com, or give us a call. It's 1-800-710-1900, and hit extension 1. That'll go right to our support team. They would absolutely love to be able to help you out. And Jordan mentioned, going to the help section inside of Manage360, just clicking on your name and clicking on help. That help file there is a wealth of information. It has step-by-step on how to do things. And there is a complete section on settings. So if you go in there and click on settings, the list is long. It's just as long as the list, when you click on settings inside of Manage360. So definitely go there and check that out. Now, we have been recording these sessions. The previous session was recorded, and this one is also being recorded. This is the link to go and review the previous session. So dynascape.com/dynascape-manage360-master-class. And that'll bring you up to a blog post that'll have all of the recordings. So this will be number 2. So as soon as we're done here, I'll go ahead and convert the recording and get it posted, and you'll get that as a follow-up probably within the next day or so. For our next webinar, number 3 in the series, we're going to be talking about construction change orders. And we all know that construction jobs happen, and they cannot happen without changes. Changes absolutely are a thing that just exists inside of construction jobs. So we totally understand that, and we have a feature within Manage360 that handles that. It's your change order management system. And that session will be all about change orders and their best practices, how to set up change orders with work areas, the approval process, all the different print options that exist, and when and how to build them. So definitely join us for that webinar. We'll put a notification inside of Manage360 a little bit before the time that it's about to start, just to give you a little bit of a reminder. So thanks again for joining us. We'll talk to you next time with webinar number 3, construction change orders.